like to start off with a quote here from William Blake. And knowing William Blake, those of you who are the English teachers out there, we may not be quite sure what he means by this, but I know what I think he means by this. That if men were wise, the most arbitrary princes could not hurt them. If they are not wise, the freest government is compelled to be a tyranny. And I think that's what we're hoping to work against is a tyranny brought about by people's uh, lack of wisdom, if you will. But we'll work on it on practice rather. I first want to draw your attention in the Google Classroom to a PDF there. I did a text alignment while we were planning these sessions, or TEKs, depending on how you prefer. I done too much early reading to not look at the TEK and make it a short E, but I understand why it can be a long E, just like GIF and GIF, right? But it has text alignment, and I did it for social studies, starting with fifth grade, because of the way fifth and seventh and fourth and seventh and fifth and eighth mirror each other, as well as 11th grade, and then also in government, and then English language arts and reading throughout the grades. And then I also looked at some other areas that I saw that we had people from journalism, media, etc. So I know you know your standards, but these are the ones that I went through that seem to be aligned with each of the sessions and the kind of work that we're doing. So that may help that for planning. So because we're coming back together at the end, I wanted to look at across all of the sessions and also to think about what is it that we're hoping is the outcome for our students. And so when the New London group met originally in Connecticut in the mid 90s, seems so recent, but not really, they were thinking about what critical literacy pedagogy might look like in the 21st century. And I'm sure they had no idea what was to come, but they were thinking about critical literacy and how to design it for students because they wanted students learning in school to benefit them as participants in society, in public life, community life, and economic life. And I think that's what we're talking about here, so that we can have well-informed citizens. So as a framework that I use, and it's very similar, you'll see, to a lot of what the news and journalism networks use, we've coalesced at a central area, even if we came maybe from different research perspectives. I use the four reader roles, which are then renamed as the four resources model, which actually originally came out of Australia. And it was a way of thinking about 21st century literacy as the kind of skills that students would need to be successful. And they talk about these four reader roles. And the reader roles are not like roles, if you're familiar with literature circles, where students might ask questions at a certain time or they might make predictions. These are more the kinds of things that we do as readers. And we move back and forth between them fairly seamlessly. Although there is a real difference between the first two strategies and our skills in the area and the last two. So we'll start about with that one to start with. So, Alan and Luke, who originated the four resources model, argued that one role that readers take is as a code breaker. And certainly, those of you who might have young children or may have taught in the early grades at one time, it's easy to see how the code breaker is a part of elementary school lives, right? They decode the words in the text and their meaning. And they even look at that first standard and say, understand how print works. Well, certainly that's young kids because they're learning top, bottom, left, right. But it's older kids too. Certainly words become more complex, the text becomes more difficult, and the print itself becomes more complex. If you think about the textbook that you use in your school, if you use a textbook, and you flip it open in your mind to a particular page, you would probably note on that page, it is not simply text. There are tables, there are sidebars, there are diagrams, there are pictures with captions, there are pull-out boxes, all kinds of text that look a lot more like a web page these days than look like what we thought of as books when we were in school. It was always exciting to have a color picture, right? And so how print works is different even as students age as well. They also use strategies to decode and figure out meanings of unknown words, to clarify difficult words and phrases, which is more like being able to interpret figurative language. And then finally, they use really varied strategies to be able to do these things. So they have more than one strategy. They're working through what's in the code, the words, uh, and the language, uh, while at the same time they're functioning as one of the other roles, which is a meaning maker. Now, for those of you who've done work with the good reader strategies, or what we think of as the cognitive strategy instruction for comprehension, the good reader strategies are those that probably most people are familiar with. This is usually the one when I talk about it, people are like, "Oh yeah, I got that. That's definitely what we've talked about." So this is making meaning, right? Meaning maker. Kids using personal knowledge and background knowledge. They make text connections to themselves, other texts in the world with that background knowledge. They make predictions, and as they read, they evaluate their predictions and revise them. They're able to read between the lines or between the text, even, and draw inferences or even conclusions. They ask questions as they read that are not necessarily teacher type questions, but questions that are naturally bubbling up in their head. And then often they will summarize the text even in an informal way and possibly try to combine those ideas, synthesize those ideas together with the other schema that they have on the topic. And what I think of as the most important meaning maker uh, strategy, they monitor their comprehension, because the big difference we find between kids who read text successfully and kids who have more difficulty is that kids who have difficulty sometimes are not thinking about, is this reading making sense as they're reading? And there are a variety of reasons why that might be, but we know that good readers think, did I understand that page at the bottom of the page, even if just informally? And they may go back and reread if they don't, or if they did understand, they'd move on to the next page. So those two, pretty easy ground for people. They feel pretty comfortable with them. But these next two are very much a part of that critical element. And they are having students begin to look at our purposes for text, reading and writing, our production, our reception, and also how texts themselves have purposes. So good readers can figure out how to use a text and how to use the meaning they made with the text. And so this includes setting a really clear purpose for reading, different than the purpose in that code breaker, more like, why am I reading this text? Am I reading for pleasure, to find information, to identify things, all of those things that we think of as our objective factors. And then they will think about, if they have learned something from a text, how they might communicate that with others. What would be an appropriate way to do that? And then finally, this is the big one, they understand that different kinds of reading expression, so reading, writing, communicating, are called for in different situations. So again, we can see how with little kids, that could be something as simple as, what is the difference between the way we would write a note to our parents and the way that we would write a note to a principal. So talking about audience and tone. But it's also that, would I give my teacher a TikTok video as an assignment for a class if it wasn't explicitly something that she had said was okay? Possibly it'd be okay, but I need to find out, is that an appropriate way to communicate? And then finally, this last one, text analyst, you're going to recognize a lot of this language, because this is the language that almost all of the news media, media literacy, news literacy, critical media literacy, all of the different names that we use, they align very much with what comes out of these programs and what we need to think about when we're looking at text. So this is the idea that good readers analyze text with a critical eye. And in this case, it's critical with a big C, like um, evaluation, versus critical with a little c, like saying, oh, they didn't put a period or it wasn't too long. Okay, so it's an evaluative eye. That would be a better way to put it. And the first thing we want to do is identify purpose. For younger kids, we talk about that as, why do you think the author produced this work? What was the purpose for the work? What do you think they were trying to communicate? Also identifying the author's point of view towards the story in a fictional case, or towards the topic in nonfiction or expository writing. In that will come in out of fiction, often with sometimes with narrator's voice, but sometimes not with narrator's voice. It may have come through the behavior of the characters. And then in nonfiction, it would come through with tone, with topic, with word choice, all of those things that we have gone through and will continue to go through. Good readers also think about, if I know that point of view, the author's point of view, are there any point of views on this topic that are not represented here? And it's not that every text needs to represent all topics, and certainly that is not possible, but it's that we think about, well, this is sending this message. What might another group or another community have thought about that at the time? And again, this is only appropriate if it makes sense towards improving their understanding. We're not going to have to look at multiple points of view, for example, I'm trying to come up with something that's very non debatable, but we'll go from there. And then finally, this last one, the, the last two come together. We're thinking about positionality here, which is, how does a text in its purpose interact with the reader? In other words, what does the author expect the reader to conclude when they read their text? What do they expect the reader to think about? What do they expect the reader to question? What do they presume the reader agrees with them on? What do they presume the reader may not agree with them on? And then that last part is the, again, important part for the text analyst. As a text analyst, students are going to figure out if they, once they know what that message is, do they accept the message, reject the message? Do they partially accept, partially reject? All of those things are possible in their decision making, but we look for an opportunity for students to be active in that way. Oh, I read this article. It agrees with my opinion on whether college athletes should be paid or not. The author, although it's an opinion piece, uses several pieces of factual information to support his point. And I find that to be a persuasive argument. That would be an example of accept. Resist could be, although I recognize this point of view by the author, I disagree, and these are the reasons with which I might disagree. So in the 21st century, we're asking kids to do that even as early as kinder. Um, and we're asking about it formally starting in second or third grade. My second grader just had to write about different points of view on a topic, and it was on recycling, whether we should recycle. So they're already looking at persuasion, about what supportive argument is in second grade. Now, that came from reading, from literacy, if you wish, uh, and how reading has looked at critical literacy since the early 1990s. But looking at critical literacy and how it interacts with media, with news, um, we see that people coming from the media perspective, journalism, all of those, the kinds of questions they're asking, the key questions, um, are very similar. Who created the message? How are they trying to attract my attention? How might different people understand this message differently than me, right? What other points of view are here that might not be represented? And that includes my point of view and others. What lifestyles, values, and point of view are represented or omitted from the message? And then why was the message sent? What was the purpose for the message? And these things become somewhat iterative, especially as we look at texts that have passed through multiple people's hands. Another challenge, before we get into the activities, is that although I'm going to share with you a lot of lesson plans, a lot of activities that will help you practice things, example materials you can use. In general, critical media literacy isn't a pre-packaged curricula, right? Because everything changes quickly. We have a picture example that I'm going to look at in a second. I get new pictures every few months whenever somebody in my Facebook friend group shares something that I think, oh, that could be interesting to use in presentations. And so it really looks at a different type of pedagogy. And it's a pedagogy, as we've seen through the earlier sessions, that really involves teachers working side by side with students. Sometimes we're ahead because are the more knowledgeable other on particular topics, but sometimes the students are leading because they are the expert on, say, TikTok or Trill, or Byte, which just got purchased by Contact. And if you haven't heard, those are the three next up and coming short video softwares that are hoping to, or apps, if you will, that are hoping to take down TikTok. So, um, and you can see too that giving kids that power is also part of challenging hegemony, which is really at the bottom of the New London Group's perspective, that it gives students the opportunity and the skills to be able to challenge those who might be more powerful than them, um, because they understand the text and how it's functioning. So this first, and this is shared on the documents for you as well, so you can see a larger version. I've printed this out as big as 5 feet tall, so it's a high resolution, so you can make posters for your classroom if you want to. And this is a poster that I made in collaboration with some middle school students in a field-based block that we have working with middle school students, where we were looking at some of the materials from the European Union Media Center and how they were classifying fake news, because the students talked a lot, and I thought this was very interesting, that there's a real difference between um, fake news that is purposely fake, when people share joke memes or other things, and when students, well, not even students, but anyone misunderstands the purpose of a text, for example, not recognizing a joke website or a satire website. Um, and the difference between errors that are made by newspapers with corrections to follow. So we went through and we tried to group some of the different kinds of fake news that the European Union had identified, and we thought about how they were similar or different. If you ever done list group label as a strategy, it was very much like that. We laid out the 10 items. We thought about how they were similar, how they were different, what sort of characteristics they shared. And then we thought about how we would group them together and how we might label those groups. So the students came up with 4 categories of fake news and different ways of identifying them as we worked through. So their first category, and it had to do with author's purpose, so getting back at those questions, right, was purposefully misleading. So you see, we've got the little frowny face up there. So these are texts that were created knowingly to be somewhat less than straightforward. Put it that way. So we have completely bogus text, and bogus is the European Union word for it, by the way, that are completely fake texts, created to be fake, created to share and to mislead. Okay, so that's one kind. Those are sometimes easier to identify than the others because they, like the just plain wrong, sometimes are clearer. There's also propaganda, right? And propaganda is fake, but in a different way. It's taking information and perhaps spinning it. As you see, we get into the partisan next. But propaganda takes information and tells you a story about that information that they want you to believe. Okay. So it's fake and it's trying to persuade you to believe it rather than this is true, believe it. It's look at this. It is very true. And this is why. Okay. And we can talk about propaganda and the standards as well. Then there's partisan texts. Partisan texts are put forward by a group that are skewed to their belief system. Right? If we think about epistemologies, there are epistemologies that go beyond just the parties in the United States, and certainly there are multiple parties in different countries, but people skew information in lots of ways. I might skew information because I want people to sign my petition. I might skew information because I want people to look at it from my point of view. And those are often the things that are hard for fact checkers to come through because the facts themselves might be accurate, but the way that they are interpreted or elaborated on are less than factual. And then we have clickbait. Clickbait is often misrepresentative. The facts in the story themselves might be accurate, but the headline or the SEU search terms or different ways that they might come up in your Google search have been misrepresented so that you are fed these articles with topics or titles or labels that don't really align with the content that's in them. Okay. So those they said were purposefully misleading. The people that created them had a purpose in being misleading. And then they said, well, there's also this other category that isn't necessarily misleading if you understand the context of the text. And it goes beyond these two types, but these were the two types that they said were really all about context. So, satire or humorous hoaxes, meaning they are hoaxes that are put forth never with the belief that they are true or even with the hope that people might believe that they're true, but for humorous reasons. And they're sometimes mistaken by people who are not familiar with sites that share humorous content. And then there's also sponsored content, which it's funny. We think about a lot in print, right? Or I think about it a lot in print. There's always a section, although it's been quite a while since I've been on an airplane for obvious reasons. But in the airplane in-flight magazines, they have usually huge sections on a town or an area that people might visit with the airline. And so there's a whole section on Santa Fe, New Mexico, and then you see the little print at the bottom that says this is sponsored content, this is an advertisement, this is a paid advertisement, all of those things. But we also see sponsored content in non-print based texts as well, as we do the other kind, right? So there are infomercials on television. There is sponsored content related to radio, not just a pay per play per se, but there are radio type advertisements that may sound as if they are radio instead. And so in that case, people might mistake the sponsored content, which is by its nature propaganda, for factual related content that is not advertising. Right. So then we can talk about advertising as a critical rating activity separately. Right. Then they said, well, there's also misleading. So, and not when people meant to be misleading or not when people were trying to be funny, but they were misleading just because they were misled, right? And there are different kinds of ways that people are misled. So they said that conspiracy theories might be one way that people are misled, and then they share those conspiracy theories. Pseudoscience, which is very similar to conspiracy theories and often interacts with it. The same thing. They read the pseudoscience. They was shared with them as true. They believe it to be true, and then they share it to their friends. And then the last one is misinformation. So this would just be if someone shared an incorrect statistical number that was later corrected, but this person continued to repeat it. Or if someone had given a set of data um, that was incomplete or was missing some information in how it could be interpreted, that might also be an example of misinformation. Certainly, people cherry picking could also fall under misinformation as a time. And then there's the last kind, which is just plain wrong. People were trying to get it straight. They were trying to tell the truth, but they made mistakes. And the most important thing about that is that we know that reliable sources, when confronted with mistakes that they have made, should very quickly and very publicly explicitly correct those errors. In some of the search that I was doing to prepare this presentation, one thing that I encountered was an interesting idea that in um, writing what was essentially a reflective autobiography um, for Walter Cronkite, the newspaper reporter from the New York Times made about 12 errors in his obituary and then had to put in a correction that included about 12 items of incorrect information about Walter Cronkite and then correcting it, which was a dramatic irony for many people, I would imagine. The other reason we care about the different kinds of fake news is that fake news is not static. It is often moving because of the nature of sharing and the nature of media sharing online, and it often morphs into different kinds of fake news. And this is a story that was actually published in the New York Times in 2017, and there's a link in the reference list. And it followed a Russian propaganda post on a parody website all the way to it appearing on Fox News. And it's very interesting in the article. So first, there was a Russian parody website. So think of it like the Onion, whatever the Onion. It would be the Borscht. Call it that. That was the Russian parody website. They said that there was a Russian attack on a U.S. ship, and it had been very successful in stealing the ship from the US to the Russians. Okay. Then that was shared by someone on Facebook. Something from the parody website was shared by someone on Facebook as more legit news. And it was picked up, interestingly, by Russian television. Now, Russian television would have had direct access to the parody website and probably would have been aware of it. And it suggested that they probably were aware that this was not accurate information because inserted in their story, separate from the original story, was a quote from a US Air Force general that did not appear in the first two posts. So someone was adding to, they were shining up the fake news as they were passing along. And then the Sun newspaper, which you may not be aware of, but the Sun is one of the many tabloids in the UK. So it's a tabloid type publication. It is not necessarily known for what we would think of as straight news. Not quite the Inquirer in terms of its reputation, but more along maybe the New York Post. That would give you a perspective. And the Fox News reported on the story from the Sun. Now that's not surprising because they're both owned by Roger Murdoch. But when they did it, it was very interesting. They put the article on foxnews.com, and there were a few comments in it that suggested that they were in on the joke, but it was shared as a fairly straightforward story. And so it's very interesting how you can watch a story move through the news. And these two reporters who followed it that way, it's fascinating. The article's quite long, but if you're looking to read it, the link is there, and you could even go with the students and follow them through because with the archive you can see the whole story and they have all the links and the connections there. So why do we care about news being shared and how it morphs and what kind of fake news it is, and why would it matter to our kids, right? Well, here's a picture that our kids probably won't care about, but it was shared by a friend of mine who is also a teacher educator and has been in education for a very long time. And she shared it on her Facebook page, and several people commented. And I said, I don't know, it just looks kind of strange. And so I started going from there. Now, I'm not going to say more than that. So this was shared 6 weeks ago, the middle of October of this year. And the source that she shared it from was ifunny.co, which is a web page that publishes humorous items, but not fake items necessarily. So it wasn't like the, okay. So the source wasn't that helpful. But now I want to go through and read the picture with those ideas that have been shared with us as critical readers. And I would want to think about, so what do we see here? So for example, what does anybody want to call out some of the things that they can identify? What are we looking at here? What do we see?
I don't know. What do you mean?
In the picture? Like literally, what do you see? Let's start by labeling. You can talk about the top picture, you can talk about the bottom picture, you can talk about the margin here. So because the first way we look at it is just what do we see? Sorry, I've got to pull my chat forward here so I can see you. Okay, very familiar cast in upper pick. Okay, so some people, especially those of us who are older, recognize the actors in the top picture. Brady has identified that the lighting is different. Well, that would make sense because this is supposed to be kids in 2021 recreating the picture from MASH. People are also noticing the haircuts, right? Yeah. So what does it tell you about when this picture was probably originally taken? Although the TV show was set in the 1950s and early 1960s, it was mostly filmed in the late 70s and 80s. So yeah, we see a lot of 1970s, at least the men's hair that we can see. Loretta Swit's got the nice center part. That's also very 70s, although coming back as well now. Um, and then you do see that the pictures at the bottom are mirrored. Somebody was going to say something. Let me talk over you. Okay. Brady also noticed something about the faces in picture two. Some faces are brighter than others, despite what should be more consistent lighting. So, meaning these faces all have a fairly similar, like the shine. You can see the shines on this side, the shine is on this side, the shine is on this. You know, the light is coming slightly from stage left onto them, onto the kids at the bottom, because here it's on the same side, but here he's kind of darker. Although you could argue he might be a little darker here. Okay. Anything else you notice? Look at details. Look at what's behind them. Look at what they're wearing.
And I feel like when I've seen recreated photos, they
Hmm.
never get it they never get it actually exact, even if it's like people recreating themselves like at a certain age, they're never quite positioned exactly the same. And
Hmm.
I feel like this one is kind of hitting it perfectly. Like the hats are um the same in the background. I mean, and they
Oh,
could have
sorry.
green screened it for sure, but
Yes, but
um,
it's very similar. And when I started looking at it, I was like, oh, look at that. I mean, it's not identical because it looks like his hat's in a different position, but a kid would probably be shorter, so his hat might be slightly different. But then if you look over here, Frank Burns's hat is in the same place. Or if you look behind, how could I Klinger? It's like, how could I forget his name? The whatever, it looks like bells that are hanging from the wall, that's aligned with his hat in the exact same angle. I mean, that's pretty precise for an angle to be replicated. We see the same thing with Father Mulcahy. Um, the distance between the edge of his hat and the edge of the picture, it's slightly different, but the line is similar. What do you notice about their clothing?
The picture is the same in the second one. The creases on their clothing are the same. It looks like they just replaced the headshots with the students.
Yeah, so let's look at that. Look at Alan Alda's shirt here, and look at Alan Alda's shirt here. And in fact, the main thing that looks kind of funny is he's got a middle-aged person's belly on a 12-year-old kid's face. But we see the same thing here. Look at Trapper John. Sorry. He's got a wrinkle here and that same wrinkle here. So those are the kind of things that make you go, or you wonder. Then let's think about, so if someone made this picture, we have this caption. Do you think the person that made this picture made this caption? Well, we don't know. We might be able to find out. But we know that somebody made this caption. It didn't type itself out of um, the primordial ooze and create itself. Someone typed that in. So why would someone do that? Why would someone say, check this out, a group of kids recreated the MASH cache photo? Well, one thing that we might think about is that, like many things on the internet, clicks bring money. They bring money for advertising. They bring money mostly for advertising. Just keep it there. And so I might change the title as an example because I want to drive more people to my site. And I think that that might drive more people to my site. And the person who did it, it was shared on a site where most people discussing it are, I'll put it honestly, over 40, older people, if you will. People like me still on Facebook rather than kids on TikTok. Um, and it was a story, MASH, right? MASH would be something that people my age would be interested in. It would not be something that younger people would be interested in. As an example, I had a student this semester whose name was Keely. And in the second class, I said, Keely, are you getting a lot of attention now with Ted Lasso? And she said, oh, I don't know. I don't watch it. I'd have to ask my parents. And I thought, oh, of course you would. Yes, that would make perfect sense. So thinking about the audience and who watches it, we thought about the caption. Does it go with the picture? What might be an accurate one? And then that last one, we just looked at purpose. So last time, and I know not everyone was here, so I'm still going to go through this. You guys, well, we'll do this first. We're going to go into a breakout room in just a second with a couple other students, people. And I don't want you to talk necessarily about the picture itself, but I want you to talk about this. And this is about your personal experience. So if someone on one of your media sites that you use shared that picture, would you check to see if it was real? So a lot of people, I could have seen that in my friend's site and just scrolled by it. Now I can't because I do these sessions, so I'm constantly on the lookout. But think to yourself, would you have checked to see that if someone had shared it? How likely are you to check to see if something someone else shares was real? And then talk to each other about where you might find some answers to your social media post. We're going to do this for about 5 minutes. And then I'm going to bring you back together and we're going to talk about what you discussed and that we're going to look at what's going on with the MASH picture. Okay. So, just out of curiosity, and you can answer in the chat or you can answer orally if you'd like, because we're a smaller group. If you caught this in your feed or in your timeline or on your Instagram, do you think you personally would check to see if it was real? Did anybody have a particularly strong response to that?
I would just check if I wanted to share. That's one of the things I said. If it was something that I was going to share, I would check before I did so.
To make sure. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Did anybody have any different ideas?
I mean, it's not really hurting like people's perceptions of things. It's kind of taking away a little bit of magic, but I also don't want to look like a fool, like I fell for something.
Right. Well, and that's interesting too. I had a young person tell me it's in one of the studies that sometimes they share fake information on purpose, and I thought, wow, that's very interesting, but also very metacognitive of you to know. And it'd be interesting to see if he could identify when he did share things he knew were untrue and when he didn't, and for what purpose, what the purposes of those would be. What are some ways that we could check to see if it was real or different or repurposed or all of those many 10 different items in our first document?
Would something come up if you just put kids MASH recreation real or unreal and just see what came up?
Sure. I can tell you on 1014, nothing came up.
Okay.
And on a reverse image search, nothing came up either. So, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't come up later, which is something to watch. A lot of the sites take a little bit of time to pick up on things that have been shared, whether they're accurate or not accurate. And so sometimes you may have found something relatively fresh on the internet, and it may be a little too soon to check it yet.
Oh, you know what? Could you go to TikTok and find a content creator that is an expert on photo editing and send it to
that'd
them
be interesting.
and DM them, ask them to do a video with their best
explaining
guess.
it. That'd be a great idea. Could you do my homework for me? No, that would be great. And then there also you could probably, there's the Photoshop guy, right? The one that does all the jokey Photoshops where it says like, would you take that guy out of our picture? And so, it takes the boyfriend out of the photo or things like that. And then we're thinking about where we might find them. Okay, so let me show some of the things that I found very recently. Just within the last couple of days, I was starting to get nervous and thinking I was going to have to use something else rather than this photo because I hadn't been able to find as much information. So Google reverse image search. I know those of you who did this in Megan's session This is just a review for anybody who's new. So for reverse image search, you can use Google. There are other sites though, and you're going to look for search results of similar images, sites that may include the image, and possibly two other sizes of the image. Like has your image been cropped? And so this is a real way to look for not just like the fake shark swimming next to the car in Houston after Hurricane Harvey, but it might be they've cut someone out of a photo or someone's been inserted into a photo. Or this was originally from, it was actually from Korea. And those are the real people. They just remark, making that up. But there's all kinds of ways that images can be manipulated, even without the picture itself being manipulated. So reverse image search works best if it's something that is likely to show up on other places on the web. So if it's like your personal family photo and you run it through Google image search, it's probably not going to come up unless it is something that might have been shared by someone else on the web. So let's look at that. I'm going to do a new share here and I'm going to go to Google. You'll understand why I'm on Facebook in a little bit. Here is the results of my reverse image search on Google. So you can see I put the MASH example, which is the picture. I just uploaded it into the search form. I also could have put a URL in it, but since I had already downloaded the photo, because I took a screenshot at the time to save it. But look, now there's a possible related search. So searching now for kids recreate MASH, you probably would find an answer. So what are some things that we find? And notice there's other sizes of the image too. It measures my image size and talks about different ones. Okay, so here's a fact check. Children did not recreate this MASH cast photo. Okay, well, let's check on that. Okay, so here's a fact check. I've got it over here so I can close it. Lead Stories was not a fact-checked site that I was familiar with when this came through. So you can see here, they fact-checked it on October 21st. So it took them a week after I saw it, and I don't know how long it had been on the internet prior to that. But I read this article. Okay, is this true? And they have here digital edit. Okay, so I can read and find out more. Okay, the meme was posted on Facebook on October 14th, 2021. Huh. Okay. Whoops, that's not where I wanted to go. Sorry, I just accidentally moved back into my other share. Did not mean to do that. That's okay. I'll go over here while I'm doing it. All right, so here is Facebook. And here's the page that it was originally posted on Facebook. We can look at this cover picture. Looks familiar. It's slightly different though. What do you see that's different?
The background.
The background's different.
And that's all I could.
And it's hard with them. So it's
oh, what perspective? Proportions?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, look at his face here. It's slightly at a different angle. Her head is at a slightly different angle.
So she was just at one, maybe.
Yeah, so let me go back from the cover shot here and go down to the photo. We can go back up, see, you can see it again. So here it's been superimposed with a different background. But then here, he says on October 3rd, he has uploaded it, updated with a better image of Frank, thanks to the cover photo of this group. So he used this photo as part of his work on the photo. So he posted October 3rd and possibly earlier than that if we scroll back with an earlier edition. So let's go back to the fact check site here. And this is where they saw it. So this is the person who shared it to them. Okay. So you notice his didn't say, check this out. A group of kids recreated the MASH cash photo. So someone added this in. We don't know if it was Mary Warren or if that's the first place it was found, but that was added at some point. You're going to say something. Nope. This I found fascinating. So this is where they did the photo search in their fact checking. And it was good because since I didn't know them much as a fact checking site, they gave me some reliability by showing their methods, how they go about checking it. So the first thing they did was they lifted this photo and made it um, semi opaque or semi transparent. I guess they're both the same thing, and moved it up over the top. And look at the alignment here in the photos. We see the hands are identical. The shirt wrinkles again, that is very similar. But there's some places that are more fuzzy. Frank's fuzzy, right? Father Mulcahy's a little fuzzy. Radar's a little fuzzy. And Klinger's fuzzy. So, that's strange. So it doesn't look like it was exactly taken from that one. But then when they saw his post, this is the original post from that site without the back being taken out, right? So this photo is slightly different than the original duplicate photo here. I would not have noticed it if they had not pointed it out. And you can see there's some things here like look at the tilt of Loretta Swit's head. It's aligned with the child's head. Frank's face is more aligned here as well. It doesn't look like Alan Alda is looking the wrong direction anymore because this photo, he's looking straight ahead. So there's all kinds of reading when you notice about the lighting, for example, Brady, there's all kinds of reasons. They're taking multiple photos and bringing them together. That's always going to affect the lighting too. Yeah, the background is very green screen. You can see that back on, sorry, it's on the Facebook page. Let me get back there. You can see that kind of soft fuzziness around them that comes from that separation, right? Even a really good Photoshopper. And this person did a really good job of Photoshopping that in, but you can see the difference there. We go back to the story there because it's got another piece of information that's very interesting, I thought. And someone brought it up, so I want to be sure and share. So here at the bottom, the man who created the photos, the person who originally made the duplicate, he is not the person who made the meme, and he is not the person who made the headline, but he did originally upload this photo. He didn't even show it as a comparison. He just did it as the young kids because he wasn't trying to convince people that it was kids. He's been, as someone pointed out, doing this with lots of casts. So here we have Doctor Who, right? And here's Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. And I remember seeing this one, and this one I didn't even look at because they didn't look to me nearly as much as the characters as these people did, right? So I hadn't even picked up on this one. So then I was like, oops, that one had gotten by me. I hadn't seen the Doctor Who one yet. And they updated this. So after they posted it, once the person who created the app, and he did use Face App, someone brought that up. I was trying very careful to not cue into it too much, to change to make them younger and work through. Okay. So why would we care about this? What does it matter? As someone said, this is a very low stakes. And I tried to bring low stakes things because these are the kind of things you can comfortably share with kids, right? It's low stakes. We can talk about it early. It's not as stressful or possibly problematic. No one's going to get too upset about the MASH connection. So here I have a link if you want to see to the iFunny post, which is where my friend got it from originally. And there's even people on the iFunny post who are starting to say like, I don't think that's real. And then here a link to the lead stories. So that was cool. But while I was preparing for this, I was getting ready to think about what you guys had asked to learn about. And then also, what are the kinds of things that we don't yet know how to do and still need an opportunity to do? And one of the things that we hadn't learned about doing yet was we hadn't learned about how to, talking and doing things at the same time, I'm terrible at. We didn't figure out how to do videos because we did these with pictures. You can also reverse image search videos as well. So on the document that has all of your references and resources, which is a Microsoft Word document, I'm going to pull it up here to share it so you can see it, if you haven't had a chance to look at everything that's there yet. I started out just with references that I cite in the presentation. And then here, I do all of the media literacy and news literacy websites. And I'll go through and talk about them. But like here's CML, which I cited with the questions before, and their media kit. But I was trying to pull up, sorry, the search here. There we go. So I learned that you can search videos just by taking a screenshot of the video, and you can find if a video has been manipulated or shared in the same way you can with pictures, which I didn't know before. Okay. So there's multiple ways to search for video as well. And in your resources, in the democracy resources, I did put a reverse video search source in the US here that you can use for reverse video sources. Now I realize that we are rapidly running out of time. And so I wanted to get back to just to talk about the last few things quickly that we didn't have. All right. So in terms of fact or opinion, I know that's something a lot of people had asked about. And all of the research that I read and what I found in working with students is a lot of what they need is help with understanding what a fact is. That it's not that facts are true or that they know them to be true. It is just that a fact is a statement that is verifiable. So there are bad facts and good facts. And if we can verify it or make sure that it's wrong, then it is a fact. Whereas an opinion is a statement of a point of view. It is not verifiable. It's also important to emphasize to students, and this is true, like when we teach text structure, there are very few books that are a single text structure. In the same way, many, for example, an op-ed might include factual information to support an argument, or someone may draw a conclusion or an inference, as long as it's labeled as such, in a news report. So they need to focus on statements versus documents. And how are we doing on that? Not well, grown-ups and kids. And in fact, the Pew study, when they looked at the factual statements, less than a quarter of, well, about a quarter of all adults got all of the fact statements right. And we did a little better on opinion. About 35% of the people got opinions right. But what they found in the Pew study was that overall, people who read opinion statements with which they were likely to agree, they were more likely to label them as facts, right? And that was true for both people who lean left and people who lean right, to about the same degree. In other words, we're more likely to think an opinion is fact if we agree with it. Now, what's nice is that Pew also gave us a version of their game. And so if I go here, I can show you how they took that data. Actually, no, it's on my other URL. There we go. And so here is the Pew Research Center, which you have the link to, about fact and opinion statements, and it presents each one, and the students can go through, and they can go through, and you could make these as a handout or you could do it online, and it answers each one, and it doesn't tell you until the end if it's true. So it gives 10 statements, and you're to identify if they are fact statements or opinion statements, and then at the end they give you a link to how your data would have compared with the people in the study. And so kids can get an interesting sense of how they're doing as well as how you're doing. This last set of activities, I'm going to whip through quick because I do want to be able to address any questions that people have, are all related to the Zoot Suit riots. I wanted to be sure to include a activity that looked at historical documents and historical documents related to newspapers. So the Zoot Suits and Zoot Suits in California, particularly at the end of World War II, is an area of study that I've been very interested in. The play by Luis Valdez of Zoot Suit and other things. And so I have a lot of activities in critical literacy related to the newspapers from the Zoot Suit riots. And this is an example of an anticipation guide. So before you have students read something where they may not have a lot of background knowledge, sometimes an anticipation guide can help them activate prior knowledge, think about what they know, and also set their purpose for reading. So I made 3 statements related to some of the documents that are available for you to read. And the statements are not all necessarily true, right? So, but they are all related to what we were reading. So I have a statement: Zoot suits were worn solely by young Mexican American gang members, as an example. The students read each of the statements and then they rate them: A for agree, D for disagree, or U for uncertain if they're not sure. By the way, you notice I phrased this last one here so that even kids who don't know anything about World War II or Mexican American gang members or Zoot Suits or Mexican Americans at all, they might know about how the news is reported shapes the way people perceive later events. So it's a statement related to all of the documents, but it's more general. I also prefer to use agree and disagree rather than true and false, because kids are more likely to change their opinion than to think that they're wrong. So, related to this, these are some of the documents that come with this, and I'll give you the background. So, in 1942, someone was killed at a party, and 22 young men were rounded up by the police at a time in World War II where there was a lot of newspaper articles about how everyone who wore a zoot suit was in a gang and they're delinquents. And you can see some of these: zoot suits impounded, and that means literally the suits were impounded. Zoot suit delinquents. There's a history.com video. Um, and it goes through, and you can trace how the newspaper articles shaping people's perceptions of young Mexican Americans as being gang members and as being a threat. These documents, which I pulled from the the LA Times site, are all there for you to use. These are good ones to start with. This is the date that what is called the Zoot Suit riot, in the same way that it used to be called the Tulsa riots, right? They were all riots at that time. 2 June was when that happened. And then there have been several newspapers that revisited. And so I have for you, which is really interesting. This is the front page of the LA Times on the 2nd of June, 1943. You'll see an article. This here is the 1999 LA Times, where they reprinted that front page with a column going down the left-hand side with a reflection on what we understand about Zoot Suits now in history. There's a 1978 reflection in there and a 2018 reflection on the Zoot Suits. So the kids can get a lot of sense of how the Zoot Suit riots were driven by the newspaper and also driven by the perspectives of the newspaper. I know you saw the escape before. That's from the Newseum. But we've got some other algorithms. This is one that I developed with my friend Jane with some students. They came up with the letters hoax, and they decided what their descriptions would be for their steps in looking through documents. And there's good evidence that kids will do a lot better job with a algorithm or rubric that they design than one that's designed by anyone else. They should see these as examples, but it's better that they create an artifact with their own language and their own usage that will make them more familiar. Now, these have some of my teacher language in there because I was working with them. This is another infographic that I developed with kids that looks at the steps. So they created an infographic rather than an acronym to help them figure out how to share through. I'm hurrying to go through. This is a link to a game called Factitious, which I think is, and the link is in your sites. And Factitious is a game. Sorry, I can't seem to pull down here. Problem is I have MASH on both of my sites. So here we go. All right, let's find it here. Where's Factitious? There it is. Okay, So factitious, did I just close the factitious, will I? Okay, sorry. Factitious was developed by different researchers in looking at students' ability to identify uh, news as misrepresenting or more representing. And I'm going to pull up the game here. Its link is also in your reference list. And they have a 2020 pandemic edition all about COVID-19, or there is a 2018 edition you can also look to that deals with more general topics. And with each game, they present an article and you label it as fiction or nonfiction. Coming back just to finish quick, and then we'll take any questions. Okay, so that is from Factitious. This is another game that is in your references as well, where students develop fake news. They talk about what makes effective fake news, and then they go through and work on the ways that they could make a story fake that people would believe. Like the videos that Kirsten talked about last time, kids usually like making things like this because it is somewhat transgressive and it's exciting. We can also talk to students about their social media use. I really thought y'all had a good sense in the surveys of what your kids read or don't read, what types of places they get their information from. But we can also talk to them about what social media they use and how they use it. Knowing that can then help us create their own media. Now look at this document. This document is only about 3 years old. That is no longer in existence. People have for the most part moved on from Snapchat. And look, there's not even a TikTok here. So any questions that you guys have, I'd be happy to have you ask me.